Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Christa Worthington? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Christa Worthington was born in Brookline, Massachusetts on December 23, 1956. She grew up in a small town about 20 miles south of Boston. She graduated from high school in 1973 and from Vassar College in 1977. Christa's family was wealthy and had a long history in Massachusetts, which could be traced back to the early 1700s on Cape Cod. Christa became a fashion writer in New York City. She moved to London and worked there for a while as a freelance writer before returning to New York City. She was well regarded as far as her career. At the age of 26, she interviewed the troubled fashion designer Yves Saint Laurent. Despite her success, Christa never felt as though she belonged in the world of glamour. She was not happy with her career. Christa had several romantic relationships. She would yell and scream at some of the men she was with and would frequently complain about them. Most of the relationships ended quickly and badly. Just like her career, Christa was unable to find happiness with romance. In 1997, Christa Worthington moved to the town of Truro on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. She had inherited 2 properties and $500,000 in cash from a relative. Christa's net worth was about $1.5 million. She lived in a house at 50 Depot Road. Christa dated a man named Tony Jacket, who was a former fisherman who lived in the area. Tony was married with 6 children, but there was something special about Christa. It appeared as though he could not resist her. Christa told Tony that she could never have children, but this was not true. Christa had a daughter named Ava in May of 1999. Tony was taken by surprise. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On Sunday, January 6, 2002, a former lover of Christa's named Tim Arnold stopped by her house to drop off a flashlight. This was at about 4:30 p.m. As he approached the house, he noticed that the storm door was closed, but the inside door was halfway open. Tim was able to see 45-year-old Christa on the floor in the hallway near her kitchen. She was motionless. Her 2-year-old daughter Ava was right near Christa's body. Ava was alive. She ran toward the door as Tim entered the house. Tim realized that Christa was dead. Tim took Ava from the house and called 911. When the police arrived, they found that Christa was half naked. She had been beaten and had damage to her face, chest, arms, and legs. She had been stabbed 1 time in the chest. The knife went all the way through her body, with the tip of the blade exiting through her back. An exterior door leading from the driveway to the kitchen was ajar. Damage to the door and to the deadbolt was consistent with forced entry. It looked like a struggle had occurred outside. Christa's keys, eyeglasses, and other property were found on the ground between her house and her vehicle. There were also drag marks on the driveway. Perhaps Christa tried to escape to her vehicle, but was attacked and dragged back into her house. Christa's cordless phone was missing from the house. Her cell phone was found on the kitchen table. The number 9 was entered. It appeared as though she was trying to dial 911. An autopsy revealed that Christa's cause of death was the stab wound to her chest. Semen was found on her body. The DNA was from an unknown male. Christa had called a babysitter on Friday, January 4 at 8 p.m. and missed a hair appointment on Saturday, January 5 at noon. Therefore, it appeared as though she died sometime between those 2 times. Because Christa had an active romantic life involving a large number of upset partners, the police had to investigate several potential suspects, including Tim Arnold and Tony Jacket. Investigators believed that the semen belonged to the killer, and they waited for the crime lab to analyze the DNA. When the results finally came back, years later, investigators were surprised at who the DNA belonged to. It matched a man named Christopher McGowan. He worked for a private garbage collection company and picked up Christa's garbage every week. The police had his DNA because earlier in the investigation, he had given it to them voluntarily. The police arrested Christopher on April 14, 2005, and interviewed him for 6 hours. Christopher said that he had never been inside of Christa's house, and he had never spoken to her. He said that he had sex with some of the women along his garbage route, but said that Christa was not one of those women. The last time Christopher picked up the garbage from Christa's house was Thursday, January 3, 2002, which was 3 days before her body was discovered. When the police showed Christopher the DNA test results linking him to the murder, he said, quote, "It could have been me," unquote. Christopher then explained how he was with a man named Jeremy Frazier on Friday, January 4, 2002. They had been drinking alcohol. Christopher claimed that he blacked out that night and did not remember having sex with Christa. He then changed his story and said he did remember having sex with her and that sex was consensual, but he knew that he didn't kill her. Christopher then claimed that he remembered Jeremy driving him to Christa's house and going inside with him. At this time, Christopher had sex with Christa. After the sex, Christa gave him her telephone number as he was leaving. So presumably, Christa was happy with their encounter. Christa then saw Jeremy going through her belongings and started screaming. At this point in Christopher's narrative, he offered many versions of his story. He first said that Jeremy punched Christa while he stayed outside in Jeremy's vehicle. He then said that he told Jeremy that Christa was on the phone calling the police. Christopher claimed that Jeremy kicked in the door, entered Christa's house, and then returned about 10 minutes later. In the third version, Christopher claimed that Jeremy attacked Christa, and then Christopher joined in, but it was Jeremy who stabbed Christa. The police asked Christopher what he would say if they determined that Jeremy had an alibi. Christopher responded, quote, "Then it's all on me," unquote. As it turns out, Jeremy had an alibi. He spent the night of the murder at a friend's house. In addition, his DNA was not found anywhere in Christa's house. Jeremy Frazier had nothing to do with the murder. Despite the confirmed alibi for the person he falsely accused, Christopher continued to deny involvement in the murder. He said that he was sorry that Christa was dead, but, quote, "I don't go around killing people, especially when kids are there," unquote. Christopher was charged in connection with Christa's death. He went on trial in the fall of 2006 and was found guilty of 3 charges, including first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Christopher McGowan continues to deny involvement in the murder of Christa Worthington. His defense argued that racism led to his conviction. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Christopher's defense was based on the theory that he had consensual sex with Christa and that somebody else must have killed her later. His defense argued that he was only convicted due to racism. The jury could not believe that an upper-class white woman would have sex with a black man who picked up garbage for a living. Christopher managed to get some traction with his defense. Many people believed that he was innocent. They thought Christa's behavior contributed to her own death, like her long series of acrimonious relationships and her tendency to manipulate men. This defense strategy led to details of Christa's life being explored at the trial. It was critical for Christopher's defense to have this information revealed. The key question in this case was this: would Christa have had consensual sex with somebody like Christopher? This brings me to item number 2. Let's take a look at the personality of Christa Worthington. Many people revealed information about Christa, former lovers, friends, acquaintances, family members. It seems as though everyone had something to say about her. She left both positive and negative impressions. Many different words and terms were used to describe Christa. Here are a few of them: mysterious, inscrutable, ambitious, intelligent, talented, short-tempered, high-strung, confused, miserly, manipulative, masochistic, vindictive, impatient, angry, hostile, unpleasant, caustic, secretive, indecisive, unhappy, and isolated. As I mentioned, people had a lot to say about her. Christa was in the habit of frantically seeking advice from friends, only to reject that advice. She read self-help books on a regular basis. She was attracted to activities that were dangerous and gravitated toward men who were described as difficult. Christa wanted to have a committed relationship with a man, but she was unable to achieve this goal. She had an active romantic life, which involved frequent and sometimes risky sexual behavior. For example, she liked to have sex in unusual places. Christa told her friends that her goal was to find a man who had money and dominate him. She wanted complete control over the relationship. In reality, Christa routinely had relationships with men who did not have a lot of money. She seemed to have a particular attraction to men who consumed large quantities of alcohol. As far as the type of men that Christa would date, she did not discriminate. She dated men with various career backgrounds, including a sanitation worker, and from various racial groups, including a black man. Her dating history supported Christopher's defense. When considering all the descriptions people offered about Christa, there is this sense that she was unable to find a purpose in her life. She was a complex individual who frequently thought about what she did not have and second-guessed her own decisions. Christa was hopeful that her next romantic interest would be the one who changed everything, but she never found the right man. Christa left a glamorous job for the simple life, but then was not pleased. She thought about going back to New York City. She was always in some type of conflict. Usually she had many conflicts going on at the same time. In this way, Christa Worthington was similar to Christopher McGowan. This brings me to item number 3. Christopher McGowan was described as regularly consuming drugs and alcohol. He had an IQ of 76. This puts him at the 5th percentile, meaning 95% of the population would have an IQ score higher than Christopher. From 1993 to 1998, Christopher was in prison in Florida for auto theft and burglary. Between 1998 and 2004, Christopher was the target of 5 restraining orders. In January 2004, he told a girlfriend to, quote, "shut the blank up or I will kill you," unquote, and suggested that she would not live to her next birthday. By all accounts, Christopher was a dangerous individual who frequently employed deceptive behavior. Christopher blamed women for all of his problems. He once said, quote, "women are always getting me into trouble," unquote. Now moving to the last item, number 4. Was Christopher McGowan actually guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Christopher had a criminal history which featured burglary and being aggressive in relationships with women. He initially lied about even knowing Christa, despite being her garbage man. In a few versions of Christopher's story, he placed himself in Christa's house around the time of the murder. In one version, he admitted to beating Christa, although he denied killing her. Christopher claimed that he had consensual sex with Christa, but his description of the encounter did not seem likely. He said that Christa was showing him a Christmas tree that she wanted him to pick up. During this conversation, she touched him, and one thing led to another. They had sex for 45 minutes in the hallway next to the kitchen. That seems like a pretty uncomfortable place for that type of interaction. And what are the chances that her body would be found days later in that exact same place? Even if Christopher did have consensual sex with Christa, he still could have murdered her afterward. Moving to the exculpatory factors, based on Christa Worthington's romantic history, having consensual sex with Christopher was not outside the realm of possibility. She had a previous lover who was a sanitation worker and another lover who was black. Christa liked having sex in unusual places. A hallway would certainly qualify as unusual. Based on the physical evidence, the sex between Christa and Christopher could have taken place days before she died. Maybe it was completely unrelated to her death. Christa had many romantic relationships which ended badly. Maybe one of her former lovers wanted revenge. Investigators found unidentified DNA from 3 different men under Christa's fingernails. Christopher's IQ was consistent with being limited intellectually. Perhaps he didn't understand the questions he was being asked during the police interview. He offered many versions of his story. Maybe he was lying, or maybe he was confused. When considering all the evidence, do I think that Christopher McGowan was guilty of murder? Yes, I believe he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Among other things, he admitted to beating Christa. The strategy of Christopher's defense was to make this case complex, like it was about race and the romantic preferences of the victim. In reality, this case was very simple. I think what happened here is that Christopher McGowan became intoxicated, drove to Christa Worthington's house, and broke through her front door. She picked up her phone and tried to call for help, but only made it as far as dialing the number 9. Christopher attacked her, but Christa managed to run out of her house. He caught up with her outside and dragged her back into the house. I don't think that Christa's personality had anything to do with her murder. She may have had some turbulent relationships in her life, but those were not connected to her death. Christopher complained that women were always getting him into trouble. In reality, Christopher was always getting himself into trouble. Those are my thoughts on the case of Christa Worthington. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.